Hey everyone, welcome back to the GG YouTube channel. Today in this video I'm going to be talking about a book that I've been working on. This book is an open source book available on GitHub. As you can see on the screen now, I'm taking a bit of a different approach here. Rather than going through a presentation as I've done in previous videos, I'm actually going to look straight to the GitHub where the book is and take you through the book as it is. So the book started, I think, sometime back in 2020. And if I just click through here in the issues, I can see, okay, the first issue is from April 2020. Maybe there's some older. It sounds about right. So what is it that I'm trying to do with the book? What I'm trying to do is distill all of the information that I've learned about decentralized gaming from the actual builders themselves and from things I've learned either by doing a little bit of coding, for example, or from reading or from discussing with other people who may not be builders but have some interesting games, or even just from my own experience of playing games and being around gaming for about 30 years or more. So that's what I'm trying to do. Now, why is it that I'm writing this book? Well, the way that I see it is not many people are building decentralized games, at least not fully decentralized games. Some are building blockchain games, and there's a lot of talk about play to earn, but there's very few who are looking at how to actually make the game fully decentralized such that it sits, shall we say, quote unquote, on a blockchain. Now, obviously, you don't want to put the entire game inside the blockchain. There's other tricks that you can employ. I've talked about this in a previous video, and I even talk about that in the book. So that's a little bit of the why. Now, to tease out a little bit more of the why, a lot of people are trying to build blockchain games, but they're mostly centralized, and I don't think that's the right way. I'm not saying they're bad games, I'm not saying people shouldn't play them, but I feel that if we're going to go to the extent of using a blockchain, which is quite inefficient, then perhaps the game itself should be fully decentralized. Now, I'm saying that it's inefficient, but there are benefits, and that is something that I touch upon in this book, and I've also touched upon in a previous video. I think there's a lot of big benefits that just, things that aren't even possible with traditional centralized games, and that's why it's worth the hassle. That's why it's worth adding inefficiencies, but you have to be really smart about how you actually build the games. And that's where there's lots of trade-offs, there's lots of challenges, and there's still a lot of work to be done. So that's why this book exists, and that's why I'm basically giving it away for free as open source. People need to know where to start. People need to have a source of good information in order to build these complex games using this difficult technology. There isn't much point me absorbing all this information and then keeping it to myself. The real value of a decentralized game is not really so much in this information, nor in even the code that people write. I've talked about this in a previous video. The real value is actually in the execution of the project and building a community. That's why, for example, okay, not the best example, but Axie Infinity is huge because they've done a lot on the execution of their product and building a huge community around them. Now, that in itself will give you some sort of reasoning as to why we can have blockchain games because Axie Infinity is doing well. It doesn't quite prove that decentralized games will be great, but I think it strongly shows a direction in which we can build. And if we had an open source version of Axie Infinity, it really wouldn't be the code that makes the game, but actually the community and the execution by the team in order to build a great game and to keep with the updates, with all of the maintenance, all the problems that can happen, and having people to coordinate and to fix problems and to implement new ideas and changes. That's the important part. And that's where simply trying to kind of hide this information just wouldn't make any sense. The book itself is not complete. And by the time that you watch this video, it's probably still going to be the case. I try to work on it when I can. Admittedly, it's been a little bit slow over the last sort of 8 to 9 months. I worked on it quite well in the first 2 or 3 months and then basically it's been tricky since there. In part lacking a bit of inspiration and part lacking time. However, at some point in the future, I would like to think that it would be sort of done where the majority of the content is in, majority being sort of 75, 85%. That would be pretty good. The book never has to be completely finished, at least content-wise. It'd be nice, of course, but if it's mostly there, then at least people have a very solid reference point for most of the things that they need to know in order to build a fully decentralized game. With the videos that I have on YouTube, a lot of the content of the videos will mirror what I have here. So going through the structure here of the book, I've actually put a lot of those into videos now. So an introduction, basically what is a decentralized game. I talk about the problems of traditional games. Well, I already have a video about that. I give a history of blockchain games in one of my videos that will be live by the time that this one is live, is actually about the history of decentralized games. So there's very much a mirroring of the content here and the videos that I've uploaded. I talk about the advantages of building decentralized games, and then of course I talk about the challenges, and that's another video which will also be live by the time that this one is live, although it isn't actually yet at the time of recording. I go into architecture later. I have one video up now which hints at architecture, but it doesn't quite cover architecture as it needs to be. I go into talk about randomness, which I haven't really covered in any videos. I've talked a bit about determinism. I've talked a little bit about fault tolerance, but not a lot. Economics is something I've almost not touched in any of the videos so far. Funding and payments, not really touched at all. And governance, I've only really hinted at. But I think each of these could be an entire video in and of themselves. Further, as we get down, there's some good stuff that I've only kind of really started to sketch notes of in my own documents. Distributed action verification, so obviously about trying to verify the actions at every single node. Not necessarily the blockchain node, but some sort of game node. Scaling is another big one, obviously, for any blockchain or for any dApp. And then later on, I want to be talking about the problems and some of the solutions, I suppose, around user experience, user interfaces, graphics, wallets, etc. And there's obviously a bunch more that can be added. Now, there is obviously a lot more content that is probably relevant, that probably should be added, that I haven't even thought about yet, or maybe I've thought about it, but I don't know quite how to fit it into the chapters that I have. Even these chapters that I have written are probably lacking some information somehow, and it's never going to be the perfect book. However, but because it's open source, because it's on GitHub, someone else can come along and open an issue and say, hey, you're missing some information, you're missing some content, check out this link. That's going to be helpful. Better still is for someone to come along and to offer to write a few paragraphs or a few sentences or even a chapter. That would be very helpful. It's also a lot of work, so I appreciate that that's a lot of work, and I think people should reach out to me first before they go to the extent of writing an entire chapter, because, well, we may have different styles and we should try to work together to figure out what's going to be a coherent style. And then eventually someone could make a pull request once the chapter is close to being complete or is complete, and then that can get also merged into this book. That's the idea. On that topic of helping, I also need someone to look through what I've written so far and help to edit what I have. A lot of this is in a fairly, it's not super raw. I mean, I have edited it for grammar as I've gone on, but the language is probably not going to be particularly elegant. I've tried to be very functional in what I've written and try to sort of just make the point and kind of get to the point rather than maybe write it in the best way that I could. The explanations could probably be better. There could be better choices of words. So the main idea was rather to kind of get the book shipped, shall we say, rather than try to get it perfect with each chapter before moving on to the next chapter. That's like a sort of a rough overview of the book as a whole. There is a lot of chapters so far. There is a lot of useful stuff. I'm now doing videos to try to mirror the content of each chapter. I do need some help with writing, but I do need some help with editing. I could probably write most of the content myself. So even if no one did, that it's kind of fine because I'm sure I will get there. Of course, if I could get help with editing, that would be, a huge benefit for me and for everyone else. So that's kind of where we are. What things do I think are going to be useful or in this book? Well, the introduction section is probably not super useful for most people who are new to decentralized gaming. It will be useful for people who are completely new to decentralized gaming. It sets the context of the book and of decentralized games, but not so useful for a dev. The problems, again, with online games, this is just motivating why we want to build decentralized games. And so I think for most developers, they probably already know this. They have some idea, but again, it's a useful reference point in case anyone decides to argue with you about, why should we bother with decentralized gaming? Well, here's a whole bunch of problems that could be fixed. Now, as I've said, I already have a video on this, and in many ways it would be maybe better to share the video of those problems to someone who decides to argue with you about that. Where maybe it starts to get a bit more interesting is in the advantages. And let me just click into that. One of the nice things about GitHub is if you look here on this screen where I have this advantages based upon trust, that's a title of a section. You'll notice that there's a little link icon and you can actually link directly to this particular section. And that's one of the things that you can't do in a blog. You can't nicely link to a particular paragraph in a blog, but you can do that with a book on GitHub. And that's one of the reasons that I have it on GitHub, because it is nice to link to particular sections. In this particular chapter, I have the advantages broken down between the advantages based upon trust and those that are not based upon trust. A lot of the main advantages for a decentralized game are about trust and solving trust issues like cheating, the fact that it's unstoppable, the transparency in economics, the provenance of your items, like think of NFTs, ownership, censorship resistance, permissionless. Those are all on trust, and probably the biggest ones. Of not based upon trust, I suggest something around coordination. Potentially you can incentivize the hosting, potentially there's reduced bandwidth costs for the building team. I think blockchain, it's easier to fundraise. I talk a bit about player loyalty, player governance, so on and so forth. And then there's a nice sort of summary at the end. And then at the end of each chapter, I'm trying to have a list of references. Basically, where did I get my information from? Well, a lot of the information was in private conversation, but where I can, I'm trying to link out to resources that are on the web that will basically try to back up the arguments that I'm presenting. One of the downsides at the moment with the current GitHub book that I have is that the references don't nicely play with the text I have, in terms of like you get with some books, or if you're using the LaTeX text editor, you can have some nice references like you have maybe in Wikipedia within the text itself, and then it links to a reference at the end or whatever. That is a future problem to solve. Not sure what else to tell you about the book right now. I think I've covered like the main overview. I've kind of covered the why. I've covered the fact that I am writing it and that I will try to finish it. And I've also mentioned that I could do with some help. So that's the main points about the book. I think that's most of the main things I want to say. And if there's any way that I can encourage you to get involved, that would be great. What I will also do for the description of this YouTube video is I'll add in links to the usual places, such as our Discord, to this book, so you can find it. I'll link you to the website and anywhere else I think that's relevant to this. Okay, that's everything that I wanted to say for now. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.